I am super excited to be here, and I'm super excited for you to be part of my talk. And before we get started, let's do a stage selfie. And how loud can you scream? Can you give me a try? So 1, 2, 3, scream! All right, cool. So let's do this. I'll do a video. So 1, 2, 3. Amazing. All right, so before we can get started, I think I need to fix the colors. All right, because this is not just a Swift talk, it's a SwiftUI talk. My name is Peter, and I live in Hamburg. I live in Hamburg. I live in Hamburg. I work at Google, as Daniel mentioned. This is one of our offices. You can probably guess where it is. I am a developer advocate / developer relations engineer on the Firebase team. This is my second book. And often I go into one of our studios to record videos for the Firebase channel on YouTube. So go to YouTube/@Firebase to subscribe and hit the bell so that you get notified whenever we ship a new video. And I also do live streams when I'm not traveling. So at the moment, this week I'm not, but next week I will. So tune into my personal channel. It's youtube.com/@PeterFriese. Oh, I've got stickers, so if you're interested in swag, come find me. I should have enough for each of you, so find me and you'll get stickers. Oh, and I love Keynote. So let's talk about the environment, or environment. And funny enough, the American English and the British spelling or transliteration is the same. So environment, what is the environment? So I looked it up, and it says the environment is the air, water, and land in or on which people, animals, and plants live. So I think we can probably agree that this is the general understanding of what the environment is. But then it goes on and says, well, it also are the conditions that you live or work in and the way that they influence how you feel or how effectively you can work. And I think we can all relate to that as well. So let's look at this again. The conditions that you live or work in and the way that they influence how you feel or how effectively you can work. And throughout this talk, I will show you what this means for SwiftUI. So why? Why do we have the SwiftUI environment? So today I'm going to explain to you how it works and why we have it in the first place. Oh, and maybe I should move the mouse. Okay. So the SwiftUI environment helps us to react to external conditions, for example, color schemes. But we can also use it to define our own custom conditions. And this is probably what you first use it for. We can also use it for state management. But it also helps us to build better views. And this is something that I'm particularly excited about. So the talk that this talk is based on is a talk about building custom UI components using SwiftUI. And I'll share a link at the end of this talk to a recording of a talk and a content bundle that you can download to learn more about this. So let's take a look at how the SwiftUI environment helps us to react to external conditions, for example, the color scheme. So first of all, what are environment values? So if you look into the documentation, it says environment values are a collection of environment values propagated throughout a view hierarchy, and it's a struct. So let's take a closer look. How can we read from the environment? So here you see a very classic example reading the color scheme. So you'll use the add environment property wrapper. You'll use a key path to say what you want to read, and then you assign it to a variable, and then you can use that in your view to react to changes on that value. So here we're basically reacting to the color scheme using different background color. And the reason why it works is that add environment is a dynamic property, so any changes that happen to that value in the environment will get propagated to our view. So let's look at a quick demo, and I've added another view at the top so that we can see the difference. So the view at the top doesn't read from the environment, but you can see in the video that it still reacts to the environment. And the change tells you why you might want to use the environment to react to certain changes, right? So at the top, you can see that SwiftUI is being smart about what's happening in the environment, and it updates the color. For the background color, it's pretty difficult to see, but it still changes the background color of the button slightly. But for the text color, it's very prominent, right? So you can see that it's either black or white without us even saying, I want to use a different background color. So that is what happens automatically. But if we want to have an influence on it, we can do that, and that's what we're doing at the bottom. So in the bottom, I say, well, I also want to change the background color of the view whenever the color scheme changes. All right, so now we know how we can read. How can we write to it? So I'm introducing a toggle here, and let's just use the is uppercase state, and then write into the environment to set the text case. And you can see that when I toggle, it updates the casing of the text on my button. So that is how you write. You basically use the .environment view modifier, you provide the key path, you provide a binding, and then you can write into the environment. Pretty straightforward. Okay, let's try changing the color scheme, because why not, right? So we saw that we can write. Can we change the color scheme? So let's try it. And you can see it's not really doing what we thought it would do. And the thing is, you can't do it for the color scheme. So if you want to change the color scheme, you have to use the .preferred color scheme view modifier to write into the environment. This is one of the exceptions. So it's like the English language, right? So when you first learn English, you're like, oh, this is an easy language to learn. Everything is regular. And it's only after a while that you really realize, oh no, nothing is regular in English. You have to know how it works. And this is the same. All right, so here are some environment values. And it's not a complete collection, so the easiest way is to go basically into the source code and go through the entire source code and read them, also go into the documentation. But these are only just the ones that SwiftUI defines out of the box. And now you might be thinking, well, I'm something of a SwiftUI environment expert myself, but wait, there is more. So let's look at how we can define our own custom conditions or custom environment values. So here's how you do it. You create an extension on environment values, and then you use the add entry macro to define new values and new keys that you want to use yourself. And this is the new stuff. So I'm explicitly not showing the old stuff, the old way, how you had to do it in previous iOS versions, because it looks horrible and so much code, but this is really easy. So let's define a custom key. And as a simple example, let's define a custom key for highlighting a view, right? So we'll go and define an extension on environment values. Here's our entry. Our key will be is highlighted. It's going to be a bool, and we provide a default value. You always have to provide a default value. And if you don't want to provide a value like true, false, or whatever, you can make it an optional, and then you can provide nil if you want. It's up to you. So here's how you use it. We use the add environment property wrapper to read from the key path. It's assigned to is highlighted, and down here we can use that to highlight our view, and it's pretty straightforward, and it's a very simple example here. So let's take a look at how this looks like. I'm defining a content view, and then on the right-hand side we can now see how this looks like. So by just defining .environment and writing into my key path, I'm highlighting this text view there. Great, except it looks horrible, right? Do you want to write it .environment throughout all of your code? Probably not. So let's introduce some convenience here. So we're basically creating an extension on view. We're adding a function. It's called highlighted. It has one parameter, is on, and the default value is true. And then we move this thing up there, and now this looks a lot nicer. So by saying .highlighted, we turn this value on. And the reason why this is an extension on view and not on text is that we'll get to that a little bit later. It's one of the magic pieces of SwiftUI. So, state management. You've probably done this before, but I'm going to walk you through this. So here we have an application that has 3 screens. We have the main, and it's a restaurant app, right? So an app that a waiter might use to take your order. On the first screen, we have all the tables. On the second screen, we have a specific table. And on the third screen, we see the order status. So basically, a look into the kitchen ordering queue. And here is how the data model for that might look like. So we have the kitchen store, however you want to call it, store or whatever. It has the active orders, and it has the food items, which is the menu that this restaurant offers. And then we have the dining area store with all the tables that you've got in your restaurant. And this third view here, this screen, also needs access to the kitchen store, because that is where we want to display the queue of all the stuff that's already being prepared in the kitchen. It's a contrived example, but bear with me. So this is how it looks like in code. We've got our kitchen store, it's observable, we've got our food items in there, and then we've got the dining area store, which has all the tables. And here's our restaurant view. We define our kitchen store, we define our dining area store, and we pass it into the dining area view. And then we have our dining area view where we access the kitchen store that we get passed, and then we pass that to the order view. And in the order view, we have the kitchen store. But the issue here is this middle screen doesn't have any business with the kitchen store, but we still need to pass it through. And here we see how it looks like. So we've got the kitchen store, it's passing through here. We don't do anything with it, we just pass it on like that, and it's over here. That feels pretty onerous, right? And there's even a name for it. So those of you who've worked with React might have heard about the term prop drilling, and it basically means just passing this thing through, and it's horrible. So how can we get rid of that? Using the environment, you probably guessed already. So we put everything in the environment, and then instead of having to pass stuff through, we can just access that straight from the environment. And here's how you do that. So in the root of your application, you define your stores and all the other stuff that you want to use throughout the application. You put it into the environment using the .environment view modifier. And then, instead of having to handle that in this middle screen, you'll just pull it from the environment in just the views that need this, for example, in the main restaurant view and in the kitchen view. So this is basically I don't want to say poor man's dependency injection, but it kind of is. All right, so brace yourselves, because now we're going to do a deep dive into re-implementing text. And I'm doing this because I want to tell you why we're using the environment in the first place. So let's try to re-implement the text view using a couple of approaches. The first approach is using an initializer. So, looking at this code, the view that we're implementing is called myText to be able to tell it apart. And this part where you see this gray area with the 3 dots, that is an implementation detail. So let's just imagine that we use UIKit or some other magic to put the stuff on screen. I'm just talking about how to implement all those customizations that we use view modifiers for. So in the first approach, I want to use an initializer. So let's imagine we've got a text property, we also have a font property, we also have a foreground property, we also have a font weight property, and we have a text case. And these are just some of the things that you might want to do with the text. So, oh, and italic. So at the bottom there, you see how you must call this view. You must provide all of those parameters to your initializer, and that has many problems. First of all, fixed order. You need to provide them in this order. Adding new values, new customization options, that is a breaking change bad. It's incredibly difficult to type at the call site, and it is really unreadable at one point. And using default values might resolve some of those problems, but it's really just Band-Aid. So let's take a look at using decorators. So here again, our text view. And now we implement a font decorator, which wraps this text view. So, and we also have a foreground color decorator. And we have many more decorators that I'm not showing here. And this is how it would look like. Right? So, okay, we can optimize this a bit, so better, right? And this actually might look familiar to those of you who've used Flutter before, right? Because they do it this way. So not great. It's easy to add new decorators, that's the good part. Adding new decorators is not a breaking change, also good. The order is still significant, okay. But it's even harder to read. Like, what is even going on? Can you tell? And changes are incredibly difficult. Incredibly difficult. You know, just imagine if you wanted to remove the font weight decorator. It's just horrible. Okay, let's use decorator functions. So attempt number 1, using add state for view configuration. So what we're doing is we're going in and we have a private state to keep the style information. And here is a decorator, and you can already see I called it my font, and this is because it's close to what SwiftUI actually uses. And here is how this would look like. So it's looking very similar to what we are used to. So does it work? Well, no. Why does it not work? So the problem is that this happens during view initialization, and that is when state handling hasn't been fully set up. So this is where it doesn't work. So our plan of using add state for view configuration was a great plan, but unfortunately it doesn't work. And we can even see it when we dump the environment. So all of those values are nil. So attempt number 2, making copies. Lots of copies. So what we'll do is we'll remove the state, and that means we'll have to make copies of that view in order to modify it. So we'll make a copy here. We change the configuration, and then that's our copy, so we pass it back. So every time you call one of those decorator functions, you'll get a copy. So this is how it looks like, just the same, and it works. And when we dump this, we can see that all the values are in the environment. So, but making copies doesn't sound like that much of a great idea, so let's look at how it's actually implemented using the environment. So, here's our view again, and instead of using all those other approaches, we're defining a text style to keep the configuration. We also define an environment value like you learned in the very beginning of this talk. And then whenever we use a view modifier, we write into this environment. So here is a view modifier that changes the font style. But how can we write into the environment? Lucky enough, there is a view modifier that we can use, or it's a function rather. It's called transform environment, and it gives us the environment. We can modify it, and then it's changed. So this is how you can implement this. All right. So that was an excursion into how and why you would use the environment in the first place. Now let's move on how to use it in addition to all the other things that you might already be doing. So we're going to look at 3 use cases. One of them is action handlers. There is another one, SwiftUI styling, and finally configuring features. So let's start with action handlers first. Let's imagine that we are working on an application where we need an avatar like this, and we also want to be able to have something that allows us to invoke an action, right? So for example, we might want to click on the avatar to edit the person's profile. So here you can see I've defined a view modifier called onEditProfile, and it has a closure. And what I do in there is I just toggle the popover, but you could do other things as well. It's just to give you an idea of how it works. So how do you implement this? Here is our avatar view, and you can see that it's an image. We've got 2 text elements there. And now we first define our environment values extension with the closure. And this is probably the easiest closure you can write. It doesn't take a parameter, and it doesn't give you a return value. And here we fetch it from the environment. And then we have our extension to make it easier to call on the call side. And this is how you use it. And now this works. So that is one way how you can use the environment to do something that is convenient for developers. If you want to learn more, here's a tutorial I built. You can use that short link or wait for the QR code at the end of the presentation. So let's look at SwiftUI styling, and this is something that you can use pretty much in all of your applications, because we've all been in this situation where we're building a view like this button here, and it's a lot of code and not very reusable, really. And in this example, we could just use a regular button like this one. Oh, let me go back. Okay, a regular button like this one. And you can see that all we did is we used .button style to say this is a bordered prominent button. So how can we define our own styles to, for example, define a style for buttons? And I've got to warn you, because the following slides will contain some traumatizing scenes. So if you don't feel you can take it, now is the time to leave the room. So pineapple seems to be offensive in pretty much every culture. I don't know why. Okay, so we've all used the toggle, but can we change how the toggle looks like? Yes, we can, of course. So let's change the toggle so that we can use .reminder to make it look like this, and I apologize. So how can we do that? So first of all, here is how you implement a toggle style. And you will realize that this highlighted part here, that looks exactly like you would implement it if you just implement a plain regular view. So you would write this into your body function. Property. So, but the difference is that we have this make body function here. It takes a configuration, and this configuration contains a couple of interesting bits and pieces that we can use, like, for example, the state of the toggle. Is it on or is it off? And we can even read the label from it. And this is how the whole thing works. To make it easier to use, we define this, this extension here. And now we can do that. So as easy as that. More traumatizing scenes. So what is the difference here? You will notice that on the right-hand screen, all of the toggle buttons use this new style, but I didn't apply this toggle style on each individual one. What I did was I applied it to the VStack. So how does this work? The environment. So the toggle style, as you might recall, writes this value into the environment, and it trickles down through the environment and is available literally everywhere in your view hierarchy that lies below that VStack, so, or is nested within the VStack. So all the toggles that are inside the VStack will automatically read this value and adopt this toggle style. And this is the magic of the SwiftUI environment, really. All right, so we've got 4 more minutes to go. I've got one more thing that I'm really excited about, and it has to do with Firebase. So, who here uses Firebase? All right, so more than half of the room, I would say. So one of the most important features in any application is authentication. You need to know who the user is. And implementing authentication is not easy, and oftentimes I hear people who say, oh, well, you know, you can use Firebase to get started, and once things get serious, you should implement your own backend. And you should implement your own authentication mechanism. And that is where I go, oh my God. Implement your own backend, fine, but please don't attempt to implement your own authentication backend. Please don't, because that is really, really difficult. There's lots of people who've tried, and there are leaks and all of that. At Google, we have entire teams doing that, entire teams who do the reliability and who are on call 24/7 throughout the year to make sure that stuff doesn't break down. So please don't implement authentication yourself. But even if you use an authentication system like the one in Firebase, it's still complicated to make it part of your application. And this is why we're working on a UI library for Firebase authentication. It's part of Firebase UI. And I'm going to show you one part that we're working on, and I'm actually going to show this in code. So I've got this, and where is my mouse? Hello. There we go. Okay, so I've got this authentication screen here, and it's a little bit difficult to read. So I've got an email part, and the user can log in with the email and password or using sign in with Apple. But you know, I might want to be able to support Google as well. So I'll just add this Google value here, and then boom, I've got a Google sign-in button there. Or I might say, well, you know, actually, email and password is not such a great idea, so I'll just remove that, and boom, I only have my federated identity providers. So how does it work? You might notice that this is a view modifier, so if we go into the definition of this view modifier, you will see that I'm using the environment to write into the authentication provider's value here, and then we can go and find selected text and workspace. Oh, well, I should probably go into the library. So I've got my authentication view somewhere. Da-da-da-da. Where are the views? So difficult to see. Okay, here we go. So here's our extension. Here's our authentication screen. And here we read, and here we read which authentication providers we want to use and show them on the screen. And that is how we use the environment in the Firebase SDK to make it easier for you to easily implement those authentication screens. And here is the code on the slide, so it's easier to see. And here's how you use it on the call side. All right, and with that, we're at the end. A couple of resources. So there is a really good tutorial by the folks of the Moving Parts company. I really recommend reading that. The source code for this is available. There is a YouTube series that I put together that shows how to build SwiftUI view components. There is this tutorial which shows you how to implement this toggle. The slides for this talk are also available on Speaker Deck, and here is the all-in-one QR code that you can use to download the whole thing. It's a sign-up form. It has a double opt-in because of GDPR, so please don't forget to go into your email and confirm that you want to subscribe, and then you'll get an email with all the links. And that is it. Thanks.